want to welcome you to another class today, Advanced Communication. So far, so good. We have been making progress, and I want to believe that you are also doing your own bit by going to do further research. We're going to go and do further research. Very, very important. I just want to quickly touch on functions of NCC, Nigerian Communication Commission, the regulatory body I told us responsible for managing or regulating everything that has to do with communication in Nigeria. We have talked at length about that. I just want to quickly run through their function. Number one function of NCC is that it gives written directions to licensees. It gives written direction to licensees. That is, organizations who are offering communication services in Nigeria, NCC gives them written direction. Number two, NCC consult with industrial organization, commercial organization, and consumer organization. So these are the stakeholders involved in communication. As consumers, we are also stakeholders. So, but NCC consults with industrial organization, commercial organization, and consumer organization in taking decision. NCC, gets feedback to be able to know the rating, the performance of this communication service provider, telecommunication service providers. So NCC is not just operating in isolation as a regulatory body, but it also consults. Then number three is that it delegates function to committee it has constituted. So, and the working process of Nigerian Communication Commission is that it functions through committees. So it delegates functions to committees it has constituted. Number four function of NCC is that it summons persons before NCC in case of grievances issues. That is, if there are grievances between the telecommunication providers and maybe consumers or an individual or any other agency, NCC as a regulatory body summons everything as NCC has the right to summon such persons, either the communication providers or anybody who is actually involved in one form of grievance or the other. So they summon such a person. So if somebody should write a petition against any of the telecommunication providers, the committee who is in charge, calls the committee who is in charge, summons whoever the offender is or whoever is responsible, to answerable to such petitions. The other ones are NCC establish and maintain subsidiaries, and then the last one issues licenses, imposes terms and conditions. NCC issues licenses when anybody wants to operate in the space in that sector, and it also imposes the terms and conditions, and then it also consults with licensees before it enforces an obligation. So I remember there was a time when I think I mentioned it, where the telecommunication providers were sending unsolicited SMS that you don't bargain for. They send you messages that are not that can somehow be irritating sort of at all times, and it's a continuous SMS they send to you, and people began to complain to NCC, and NCC before NCC can actually place a sanction. What they do is that they consult with the licensees before they enforce a sanction or enforce an obligation. So that's much we can take on NCC. Just go further to do your research. So quickly, we want to look at press freedom. Press freedom. It is very important for us in our final year as 400 level to understand what press freedom is all about. Freedom of the press. We need to understand what it is all about. Now, just a few days ago, the world celebrated the Press Freedom Day. The world celebrated the Press Freedom Day, and there were several virtual activities to mark this day, most especially by United Nations, marked the International Day of Press Freedom. Now, what is this press freedom about? As a 400 level student, you should be able to explain what press freedom is all about. Simply, press freedom is the principle that, or operates on the principle that communication and expression through various media, that is print, electronic, mobile media, and whatever, should be considered a right to be exercised. Should be considered a right to be exercised freely across any nation. Let me come back with that again. Press freedom, when we talk about the concept of press freedom, it is a principle or a belief that communication and expression through various media, which includes print, electronic, film, online media, whatever media of communication at all, it is the belief that such communication platform should be considered a right to be exercised freely without arbitrary intervention from anybody, most especially government. The press in any democratic setting should be given the right to operate freely without any arbitrary interference from government. The concept of press freedom, started way back in 1766 in Sweden. That is during the first century. They were the first, Sweden as a country was the first to adopt press freedom. They were the first to adopt press freedom. It was adopted into their constitution. That is, it is called the Freedom of the Press 1766 Freedom of the Press. It was adopted into their constitution. But in Nigeria, it has not been adopted into our constitution. Now, freedom of the press is practiced in Nigeria too, and in some other and across many democratic nations. But the challenge is that there are still situations where the press freedom is gagged. I mean, there's what we call gagging of the press, GAG. When we talk about gagging of the press, we're talking about a situation where the practice, the freedom of the press to operate is being curbed or is being curtailed. Is being curtailed. That's what it means. Most especially during the military era, you discover that because of the role of the press in exposing truth, exposing corruption, so those in government tend to block the activity, tend to limit, tend to curb the activity of the press, and this is against the United Nations principle of freedom of the press, and that's why a day is always set aside, to sensitize the world, to sensitize government, to sensitize everybody that it is necessary for the freedom to be, it was necessary for the press to be allowed to operate freely. Why? Because it is good for democracy. A country that allows the press to operate is a right or a forward-thinking country. Is a country that wants to ensure that the rules of democracy is enshrined. When the freedom of the press is gagged, when the freedom of the press is intervened or interfered with, it discovered that it doesn't bring it does not bring progress into such environment. So, like I said, that in the Nigerian constitution, press freedom has not been adopted. Now, the power that ensures the operation of the press in Nigeria is drawn from the 1999 Constitution, Section 39, which is a constitution that allows the general freedom of speech, that allows general freedom of expression. That that part of the Constitution, subsection 39, says that every Nigerian has the right to disseminate and to impact information. Every Nigerian has the right. So it is your fundamental human right to distribute, or to disseminate, or to impact information. Now, this is the aspect of the Nigerian Constitution that also empowers the Nigerian press. So it is not as if a particular constitution is, is given Nigerian press that grace to operate. But in other climes, US, Sweden, Canada, the freedom of the press has been guaranteed in their constitution. So ours has not been adopted in the constitution. We only have what we call the state principle of policy. Now, there's what we call directive principle of state policy. You can write it down. Directive principle of state policy. Now, what is directive principle of state policy? Now, it is a subsection of the. It's like a I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to put it now. It's like a policy that is outside of the constitution itself that gives a directive to every state to allow the press to operate, and that all the role of the press in this regard is to monitor governance, to ensure that those in government are accountable. Let me come back with it again. It is called the state directive policy, directive principle of state policy, directive D, principle P of state policy. Directive principle of state policy states the role of the press, which has to do with ensuring that the state, that government is accountable. That government is accountable. It monitors governance. So that is as far as what that can do. But in the 1999 Constitution of Nigeria till date, there's no place in the Constitution that says this is the right of the press to operate. So the press is operating based on the section 39 I mentioned about, which is the general fundamental human right of every Nigerian to express themselves. While the other one I just mentioned, the directive principle of state policy, is a policy outside the constitution that empowers the press to monitor governance, and that's as far as that is concerned. Now, there's also what we call the FOI bill, that is the Freedom of Information Bill. Now, this bill was passed, or this bill was pushed by civil society, by nationalists, by concerned Nigerians. Now, the essence of it is to push government to see to it that freedom of the press is enshrined into the constitution. However, the Freedom of Information Bill of 2011 is either you call it Freedom of Information Act of 2011, Freedom of Information Act of 2011. Now, this bill is to ensure free flow of information in government space. To ensure free flow of information in the government space. In other words, that is, government is responsible to make known to the people certain documents that the people need to be aware of. Like, for example, so many agencies, so many international donors have given to Nigeria during the course of this COVID-19. Now, it is the right of you and I, it's right of the Nigerian citizen to know how much was given, to know which country gave it, to know the use, how these monies are going to be deployed. So the Freedom of Information Act 2011 guarantees or ensures that there is this free flow of information in the government space, in the government circle. Number two, this Freedom of Information Act also ensures that any public officer who is responsible to giving such information to the journalists to expose to the public is protected. Because we have seen a situation where in the course of releasing this public document to public domain, such officers were punished. Some officers lost their jobs. And so, in order to protect an officer to release document, for example, at the local government level, they go about to collect, to generate fund. They call it internally generated fund. Now, such document can be called for by any citizen. Such document can be called for by the journalist, who is the voice of the people. So, and then what gives the journalist the effrontery? What gives him the power to call for such, document to give, to ensure that the government is accountable to the people. We should know how much government is generating from tax, because it's a public service. So the act that empowers the press to carry out such responsibility on behalf of the citizen is the Freedom of Information Act. So to make public record and information freely available to the public. So when all of these are in place in any nation, then you can say that the press is enjoying freedom to operate. So in a nutshell, that's what freedom of the press is. A principle that communication and expression through various media, is considered a right. Is considered a right. So that is the little we can take in that aspect. So you can please study more about the freedom of the press. The press has a responsibility to expose issues, to report issues without inhibition, without arbitrary interference from government. If you are following the news, I've mentioned this also in other class too. If you are following the news, something happened in Ebonyi State, in the course of I think about 2-3 weeks ago thereabout, where two journalists one from the Sun newspaper, one from the Vanguard, they reported a news. One has to do with, I think, Lassa fever in Ebonyi State, and the other one has to do with military invasion. Now, whether these stories are true or not, I wouldn't know, but these stories were reported by these two different journalists to do this, and the governor of the state, heard about it, and he went into the public space. I think he had a press conference where he banned these two journalists without calling them, without interviewing them, without interrogating them. He just gave an address, and that he has banned these two journalists. Now, stakeholders looked at it that this is gagging of the press. This is arbitrary intervention or interference of government from, the role of the press to report issues as they are. Now, by going to give an address, telling everyone that you have banned them from life, from coming to your state, is not properly done. It is arbitrary. It is an arbitrary interference. It is against the fundamental human right of these persons who were reporting issues based on their investigation. So, fortunately for the governor, he was actually attacked by several people who knew that this was contravening the constitution. Contravening what the constitution states about about freedom of the press, freedom of expression. Like I said, in 1999, Constitution subsection 39, and then a week later thereabout, he came back to also give a public he came to the public to also address the people, saying that it was not intentional. In other words, he was indirectly apologizing, saying that he didn't come out to say I was sorry, but he said that it wasn't deliberate, that he felt that was the right thing to do. And so you can see that they themselves understand that the press has a role to society to expose issues, to report issues as it concerns the state. So let's quickly move on. We want to look at investigative journalism. Let us look at investigative journalism. Investigative journalism. Now, when we talk about investigative journalism, as a foreign level student, you should have an idea of what investigative journalism is all about. From the word investigate means to inquire. You are finding out something. You are trying to uncover something. Now, the word investigative, you will see it is a word that is used in the security parlance. You hear that the police are doing their investigation. Is a word that is used in EFCC, ICPC, Independent Corrupt Practices of Nigeria, EFCC. They go to investigate. For example, a case of maybe cyber corruption, or there's a case of fraud in the bank, in government spaces, and what have you. Now, EFCC will go there, and that's why they also introduce what we call whistleblower, where they send somebody gets information, someone gives them a lead as to a fraud that has taken place, and they go, and after receiving that lead, what do? They go and investigate to find out. Now, investigative, so there's also what we call investigative journalism. So it's a concept where it's a systematic inquiry to uncover or to expose hidden truths or to expose a secret, most especially within the government circles, most especially within the government space. Now, you will all agree with me that we all know that corruption, we all know that fraud takes place to a large extent in the government circles. You see somebody who has been awarded a contract, and rather than execute that contract, he uses it for his own personal projects. He pockets it. We have seen where people overquote for contracts, and at the end of the day, such cases are hidden. Now, when a journalist gets a lead that certain things have been, when a journalist gets a lead that somebody is involved in fraud in the government space, then what do? A trained investigative journalist is assigned to this assignment to go and find out, and uncover the truth. We have seen a situation where government will vote a particular amount to either the education, to health, and then at the end of the day, the sector is left in comatose. Now, look at what happened when this pandemic struck. You will discover that so many of us were surprised at the state of the health facilities in Nigeria. Now, God being so good, the elites could not travel out. They were also forced to be treated in Nigeria to also experience the taste of the state of Nigerian health sector. Meanwhile, at the beginning of the year, you will hear a budget is read that so number of money has been allotted or so has been budgeted for the sector. But the truth is that you only hear of it, but execution is a problem. It's either one person, a group of persons are trying to use the opportunity to feed their own pocket, to bloat their own account. Now, all of this action or all of these acts are therefore exposed, investigated, and exposed by a trained investigative journalism. So when we talk about investigative journalism, we're talking about it is the means. Investigative journalism means the unveiling of matters that are concealed, either deliberately by someone in a position of power or accidentally. Are we getting it? Investigative journalism means the unveiling of matters that are concealed, either deliberately by someone in position of power. Now, it is the exposure or abuse of power in government. Yes, individuals can abuse power. It is either in government or in private organizations too. Yes, there are cases of fraud in banks. There are cases of fraud in other corporate organizations. So when all of these things happen, investigation journalism, for example, the issue of trafficking of persons. We have seen people in high places who are engaged in trafficking. So it's not just we have also seen cases of what we call money laundering, where people take our money outside of the country through banks. They use fictitious names. Now, when journalists get lead that something like this is happening or case like that happening, they go undercover. So investigative journalism is done in an undercover manner, and then they go to research, they go to ask questions, they go to find out, to prove. There are times when they even need to get employed in that organization to be able to uncover the truth. If you have conversant with detective films, if you are conversant with detective film, American films especially, you will see that a lady can be placed, can be asked to employ, to get employment, seek an employment in an organization where a high level of fraud has occurred, and she becomes part of them. She even go to the extent of dating the person who is involved. He's even go to the extent of even sleeping with the person who is involved, just to unearth an information that is vital to the exposing of the truth. So, uh, investigative journalism is critical and in-depth journalism, and it exposes secrets. It is a critical and in-depth journalism practice that exposes secrets. Now, what are the characteristics of investigative journalism? One, the journalist must have a good sense of news and leads. The journalist must have a good sense of news and leads. Number two, it must be analytical and organized. The journalist must be analytical and organized. We're saying the characteristics of an investigative journalist. Characteristics of an investigative journalism or journalist. Now, number three, he must protect his or her sources. As an investigative journalist, you must protect your source because it is a very sensitive assignment. It's a very sensitive role. So, and in your investigation, in your research, in your bid to inquire, to find out, you work with sources. They are sources, they are very key sources, and it is ethical for you to protect their names. You must protect your source. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you expose him to danger of being killed or being kidnapped. And so you must be motivated by high ethics and morals. Yeah, very important. These are just four characteristics. They are inexhaustive, so you can research for more. Journalists must have a good sense of news and leads. You must be analytical and organized. Protect your source. You must be motivated by high ethics and moral. Now, what are the importance of investigative journalism? Also very key. What importance? Now, it proves the existence of press freedom in any nation. When investigative journalism is allowed to operate in any society, it proves the existence of press freedom. Number two, it keeps corruption, keeps fraud practices in check. That is, when those who are in high places, when there's this tendency of wanting to because they know that if they engage in it, that the journalists are always on ground to investigate and they can be exposed, and this can actually affect their reputation. So when investigative journalism is allowed to thrive in a society, it keeps corruption, it keeps corrupt practices, it keeps fraud practices in check. But a situation where they know that nobody will find out, nobody's going to investigate, then it continues to perpetuate. So, number three is that it ensures the rule of law. When we talk about the rule of law, for those of you who have done citizenship education, they have done politics, it means that nobody is above the law. Everybody is subject to the law, including the president himself. So, when investigative journalism is allowed to thrive in a society, it shows that there's rule of law. That is, nobody is above being investigated. You remember that after after one government succeeds the other, they usually go after some people to investigate them, find out whether while they were in office they embezzled money and all that. So all of these things are achievable, because of investigative journalism. Investigative journalism. Now, there are also challenges when, as an investigative journalist, there are challenges. There are challenges. Yes, you must understand that because it's a sensitive role, it's a sensitive task. So not everybody, not every reporter is assigned to go investigate because of the sensitive nature or sensitive role or sensitive task that is involved. So it takes a journalist who is well trained, who has lots of experience in the field of journalism, and they go through a lot of process before you can embark on investigative journalism. Now, investigative journalism also has its limitation in the sense that not all organizations has what it takes to create this department, in the sense that you can spend money. For example, if an investigative journalist can be asked to go and investigate something in a country. For example, maybe the person who was involved in money laundering and he escapes to another country. So a journalist can be assigned to go after that person in that country, and it can be there for weeks. Now you know what it means to spend for hotel accommodation, feeding, paying for flights and what have you. So a lot of media organizations tend to shy away from engaging in investigative journalism. So investigative journalism is an interesting one. So many journalists who are investigative journalists have won so many awards because of their role in exposing secrets, of their role in exposing truth, or their role in ensuring that that the rule of law is established within our society. So please, you can go and study more on investigative journalism. We have about 7 minutes more. Let me quickly use the last 7 minutes more or thereabout to talk about. Now, let me just quickly say this now. Now, a reporter who goes to the field, who goes to cover an event, also perform some form of investigation. For example, if government has awarded a contract for somebody to supply face mask, to supply testing kit, even at this time, and then it is not delivered, a reporter can go and also investigate. So, but investigative journalism deals more with in-depth, high-level, misappropriation of fund, high-level fraud cases. That's what makes it different from the regular reporter who goes to investigate a story, to confirm a story. But in a real sense, investigative journalism is deep journalism where you go into places that ordinarily you will not want to go. Ordinarily, a journal will not go because and there are characteristics, characteristics of an investigative journalist. You must be bold, you must be daring, you must have the guts, you must have what it takes. So it's not just any reporter that is deployed there. You must have all of these qualities. So there are qualities of an investigative journalist. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is search for some cases, some high-level corrupt cases that were unraveled by investigative journalists. It could be in Nigeria, it could be in other countries. You can just look for about 4 or 5 cases and you can write and submit to me. Mr. Padono, online classes at gmail.com. Now, I want to quickly look at communication for development. Mr. Padono online class at gmail.com. I said research on high-level corrupt cases or fraud cases that were unearthed, that were brought to limelight as a result of investigative journalism. I want to just bring case studies, write about which country, what was the case about. So about four is okay, just 4. It could be in Nigeria, it could be outside of Nigeria. 4 case studies that involve investigative journalism. Okay, now, let's look at communication for development, developmental communication or communication for development communication. Yeah. Now, developmental communication began in 1940. Now, when we talk about developmental communication, It refers to the use of communication to facilitate social development. The use of communication to facilitate social development. Developmental communication engages stakeholders and policymakers. I'll take that again. Development communication refers to the use of communication to facilitate social development. We're talking about infrastructures. We're talking about educational development. We're talking about health development. We're talking about so many things that has to do with social development of a nation, of a society. So developmental communication refers to the use of, we are using communication to facilitate, that is to hasten, that is to ensure that development takes place within the social environment. So, and when you engage, when we talk about development, we say development communication engages stakeholders, government, we're talking about the citizens, we're talking about international agencies, we're talking about policymakers. Now, developmental communication establishes conducive environment, assesses risk and opportunities, and promotes information exchanges to create social change. So communication for development is all about creating positive social change, creating positive social change within a society. A society that, now look at it, an environment where there's no communication at all. That environment, that kind of society will be backward. When people are not able to express themselves, when people are not able to talk, because communication is a powerful tool of exchange of information, exchange of ideas. For example, I have strength in a particular field, maybe in the area of food production. You have strength in the area of processing. Now, as a result of communication, we are able
Mr.
to,
Fadonu,
we're able to,
time up.
yes, please. Uh, is it time up yet? I have about 5 minutes
Yes.
more.
No,
Let me round up
it's
with 5 minutes.
7:40. It's 7:40 already.
Okay, 7:40. Okay. Okay, students, by next class, we are going to continue from where we stopped, communication development. So just do the assignment, send it to me, and then just read what the advantage of development communication is all about. So I'll
I
see you
know
in
they are
your other
going
class.
to,
Take care.
but I never need to be this.
Thank you.